Welcome everybody to Today in Space for another segment of People of Science. And today we welcome Jane Davies on. We met online through a correspondence. We'll talk about that later. But Jane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
It's good to have you here. You're on the other side of the pond over in the UK, correct?
Yes, I'm in London. Yeah.
In London. That's amazing. So tell us a little bit about yourself and about the science and what you're doing your research on.
For sure. So I'm a current master's student in digital anthropology, which is kind of a mouthful, but basically if you go from kind of where anthropology is, so the study of people and culture, it just studies anything to do with how people interact with digital technologies or digital objects. So either through them or with them, like one person and their relationship to an object. Could be social media, really anything that you can think of that's digital or technological. That's kind of where I focus my research in. And yeah, sort of started in anthropology in my undergrad and then just started focusing in on the digital. We can get into that later. Sure. And basically I met Alex through doing my research currently, which is already in digital anthropology. And then now I'm looking into anthropology of space, which I'll tell you all about if you want. So being that I'm working kind of on 3D printing in outer space, when I found Alex's podcast, which focuses on outer space, as well as you run a 3D printing company and work for 3D printers, that I was like, this is amazing.
If there's a niche that I have, it's that.
Yeah. I literally like, because reaching out, I was like, hey, this is really weird, but yeah. Can I ask you about your two key interests? Thank you.
I was like, please, I could talk forever.
But yeah, so any questions from there, Alex?
Absolutely, yeah. So like anthropology, like was that something that was always a passion for you growing up? Was there an anthropologist that you were like thought of like as someone that you'd like to follow their path or anything like that?
You know what? Not even at all. I feel like I was like most kids being like, I'm going to be a doctor or like a vet. And then I left high school early to become a pastry artist, and then that fell through. So I went to university in just general arts because the system, I'm assuming it's the same as the States, but I'm from Canada, and the system there is you can do general arts. So you can kind of go in, do your first year just tasting and testing everything to see where you want to fall. So like I did a biology course that was terrible. And then I took a course in what was called medical anthropology. So that was sort of focusing on the culture of medicine and how we've come to the place we are. How does that compare to medicine around the world? And then I just got really hooked into this idea, which is really sort of pervasive throughout anthropology, which is making the familiar strange and the strange familiar. So going somewhere you don't know to look back on your own culture, but also using your own position to see what else is out there. Obviously, there's also a big history of colonialism and all that problem within anthropology, but anthropologists are trying to do better now and not take advantage of people around the world.
Yeah. Oh, and I think in all like space too, we talked about this a little bit as well. Like even that idea of colonization, I mean, it's literally one of the goals to colonize the moon, you know, and maybe the definition has changed in the culture, but yeah, it's like you said, pervasive. It's always there.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. So yeah, I just sort of came to anthropology sort of by accident in the same way that I don't know, most of my life seems to go that way.
Oh, I hear you. I mean, that's kind of my story. You kind of went after something that really interested you, if I have this correct. And then you found the path of like, oh, this is where I can do that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. So what made you choose the UK and your university?
That's a good question. Yeah. So first of all, my mom is British, so I have that really handy dandy passport, which is nice. And my sister was out here already, so that was kind of like a move to be able to go be with my sister. But also the program that I'm in, Digital Anthropology, I've not done my research now, but at the time it was one of the few. There was another one, I think at MIT, that was similar, like digital culture. And I think one in Copenhagen or Denmark, or are those the same thing? Sorry, my geography is terrible.
Oh, I'm terrible too.
Copenhagen's Copenhagen's
not a class I was good at.
Sorry, I'm really showing my cards here. Anyways,
You're good.
Yeah,
We'll put
so
it
it was
up
one
on
of
the
the few.
screen so we have the correct.
Exactly. So yeah, it was one of the few, and I think now the digital humanities in general, so not just anthropology, but sociology or history, are really, really growing. But at the time when I was looking into universities, this was one of the few, and also that I had access to it through my passport made it kind of ideal, because there weren't really any in Canada at the time.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's funny. So for me as well, for going to college, aerospace engineering specifically, like it wasn't a thing at the time that was available in a lot of different places. So yeah, I kind of was looking at very specific places, and then also locally. But that's really cool. I mean, how has it been so far throughout that journey in the academic life? Is there anything that like speaks out to you as part of the experience, and anything that you'd like to share for people who are kind of going down that same path?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what was really nice was I took, I think, 4 years out between my undergrad and my master's, which I think really solidified my understanding that like I really wanted to do this program. It did help as well. In order to get residential fees, I had to be in the UK for 3 years before applying. So avoiding paying astronomical amounts of money.
Absolutely.
That really helped. But yeah, I mean, what has been really nice, which is maybe basic, but is just the contacts you make and the friends you make throughout the process. Like meeting like-minded people who, especially within my program, they were people who came from all different fields and all different ages as well. So getting a sort of
that's cool
smorgasbord of perspectives was really cool. Is that sort of the same for your experience?
A little bit. There's where I went to school, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, WPI. It was all engineers. Every major there was an engineering major. So there was in a lot of different ways, you got to see all the diverse disciplines and different ways that people come across anything that's engineering, but also it was very much the same. Like everyone also kind of thought the same. So there was this connection when you were describing what you did, you could ask really interesting questions to the other person. So you really got to
speak the same language in a way.
Yeah, exactly. So I can relate in that way. Yeah, absolutely.
It was nice to be able to share your excitement with someone who it's not like explaining it to your grandpa and being like, okay, I don't even know where to start with you right now.
No, totally. Yeah, like discussing what I'm passionate about to my family.
Yeah,
I love them, but they don't. It's not everyone's cup of tea, and that's fine.
Yeah. Like, so additive manufacturing. Think. Star Trek. Yeah.
And making those like easy to connect explanations is definitely it definitely helps. Yeah, but that's very cool. I like where you came at. Not the spending 4 years, whether you had that 3-year thing at all. Like I've met some people who went to college, things didn't work out well at the beginning, they took some time off and then figured out, like you were saying, what you like really focused on, like this is what I want to do. I think that's something that a lot of people miss going to school, especially in like a STEM career. You see a lot of people that don't stay in it very long afterwards because it takes so much, and if you're not really determined, it'll roll over you.
Yeah, and I do think there seems to be I mean, I must be in most faculties, but there seems to be quite a rush to get through school and to join the workforce. But I just felt like, I don't know, I've kind of always believed I'll wear many different hats in my life. So for me, it wasn't a rush. I was like, I'll just enjoy the ride. But
no, that's great. That's a great mentality to have about it.
Yeah, it's I mean, also, not really knowing what you want to do. I think for the most part, it seems like engineers are pretty driven folk who know what they want. So
yeah, we're tormented by needing to solve problems. So there's a lot. There's a lot to do in engineering. So
definitely. Were you straight the way through also?
Was I straight? It took
high school
me
straight.
So I went from high school into engineering. I didn't get any advanced degrees because with engineering, it's more of a focus. So at that point, it's like if my boss wanted to pay for it for me to be specialized in something, great, but I wasn't going to spend the extra money.
Fair.
But yeah, no, I went from there to then a few years of just trying to find an engineering gig, and in aerospace was really this is 2011 to 2015. There really wasn't that much available, or you were either too qualified or underqualified, which is most people fall into that. Unfortunately, it's frustrating, but that's part of the journey for sure. And that's why I think the way that you approached it, and that's how I would recommend to a lot of people. You know, I work with a lot of interns at work who come in for like 6 months, a year, and that's the thing I recommend the most is like try different things, because that's basically what I was doing in those years where I couldn't find that job. I was like doing other jobs, learning what I didn't like, and then learning ultimately like, yeah, this is where I want to go with it.
Definitely.
Yeah. But back to anthropology.
Yes.
I was doing a little bit of research because, you know, I'm certainly not an expert in it, but I think it's like a fascinating subject to look into, especially like humans, right? Like what have we done in the past, and how do we behave with these certain things through certain times? Is it strange as do you notice a difference in the way that you might approach digital anthropology, living in the now and documenting it as it's happening, versus some of the other, like, you know, historical ones or different types of anthropology?
I think it's tricky because at the same time that you're documenting the here and now, as with I'm sure many fields, by the time you are publishing work, it's already the past.
That's the past, yeah.
So you're never really writing the present. Like in a way, even if you're going to like Borneo or to like the Amazon to study a culture that is very different from your own, and like you're always going to just be looking at a moment in time. It's never going to actually be the present. But I do agree with you. It is really fascinating. Like, I mean, people who are studying the digital response or digital culture around the pandemic, right? Like that's been a very interesting way of like population monitoring, let's say. So I think, yeah, it's tricky. Yeah, it is really interesting studying it as it happens. But I mean, you're always sort of still informed by what's been happening in the past and looking back at the same time.
Right. And if you spend any time to even think about it, about what you're actually looking at, you're automatically in the past. Yeah. So
yeah,
exactly.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Speaking of like today's world with the pandemic, and how like in 2 years time, we went from really being on our electronics all the time to absolutely being on your electronics all the time, being more tethered than we've ever been before. Is there anything that you take away as a digital anthropologist of what we're going through now?
I'll have to think about that.
Okay.
Definitely from a researcher's point of view, it's been interesting because I think there are certain demographics that it might be more difficult traditionally or in the past to connect with online. But now, like, for example, my field work, I've been talking to people around like the States from the UK, and people of all different age categories. And I don't know that necessarily all of them would know how to use Zoom or like Skype or whatever, maybe 5 years ago. Like, I think it's made people more ready and more able to do that. So that's, I mean, then to answer your question, I guess I've talked myself there.
No.
It's definitely changed the speed of communication. I think not necessarily that communications change. People have been able to send letters, telegraphs, whatever throughout history, right? But the way that you have everyone at your fingertips and they're all there.
Yeah.
No,
that's a great point. There's a lot going on, and I feel like this is probably the first, as the weather gets better, I feel myself like pulling out and starting to, like, metaphorically thinking about like what I've gone through the last 2 years, just on a personal level, never mind what everyone else is going through. This is going to be a big onion to unpeel.
Yeah, definitely.
Over the next few years.
Definitely. And I think that'll be interesting with things coming out of like both anthropology and medicine, psychology, is the mental effects of being tethered to your computer, your device all day. We don't really know. Like this is unprecedented, as they keep saying.
Yes,
right?
the word gets used a lot.
Attached. Yeah.
True. So 3D printing. Let's jump there.
Yes.
So when was the first time that you started connecting 3D printing with anthropology?
This I can pinpoint finally. It was the beginning of my course, so would have been September 2020. And I went to a conference that was about like anthropology of space. And
do you remember the name of that conference? No, it's okay. It's all right.
I think it was run through the Center of Outer Space Studies of Space Studies at UCL. So it's COSS is the abbreviation, COSS. And my supervisor was actually presenting, his name's Victor Buckley. He was presenting his sort of projected research, so on the International Space Station. And he was looking at 3D printing and how technically these objects that you 3D print in space can be space native objects. So within especially digital anthropology, we look a lot at artifacts and material culture, so how people connect with objects. And then when you go somewhere else, you see how people interact with objects differently somewhere else. Whereas in space, how does that look if we have an object that's made off Earth? Yeah. How does that change how people interact with it? So that's where I first got interested, was just hearing about that. And I was like, oh my God, like mind blown.
There's so many things that are like even things like liquor. People are launching stuff into space just to spend, getting above what you can technically call space, like Kármán line, even if it's like a weather balloon. And people are like, this flew to space. And there's a,
oh my God, yeah.
There's a premium on all that stuff. It's crazy.
Totally. I mean, that like space aura, like capturing that, it's in like, I mean, collectors love that.
Yeah, it's true.
That's the whole thing.
It's true. Given the recent news, so we'll have covered this on the podcast by the time this episode comes out, but do you hear the news about NASA opening up those Apollo lunar soil samples? And they successfuled planted plants in the soil without affecting it that much. They just basically watered it and see if they could get a seedling and sprout, and they did successfully.
Right. And these were isolated, so not planted on the moon. They're planted in soil that's like
soil from the moon, but on Earth.
Okay, cool. Wow. Yeah. Oh my God, the big news.
Yeah, big news. So that's the first time that's ever been done. Terraforming. And to think like that, before it was just a tiny possibility of maybe if you got to Mars, like I think the Martian's a perfect like example of that, like growing potatoes on Mars. If we just show we can do it on the moon now, we could have a whole space farming infrastructure by the time we actually get to Mars. And then farming there is going to be way easier.
Yeah. Once we get there.
Once we get there. That has to happen. Absolutely.
You're right. It's a crucial step on the way there.
It is. But yeah, we're in this cool phase where we're testing all that stuff finally. It's NASA.
I'd not heard about that. Really That's seriously. So cool.
Yeah. It was literally, I think, 2 days ago. Yeah.
Wow. I just always imagine any soil from Earth, from the moon, to just look like chalk, like to just be white. I don't know why.
Yeah.
It's probably not, but
yeah, there's definitely, it's highly reflective. So I think like a lot of that is just the sun coming off of it.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
It's super like spongy and powdery. It's kind of crazy. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Love that.
So that's interesting to think about. I'm interested to think what you think about from an anthropological standpoint. Would you guys have a big interest in the types of seeds that actually start terraforming the moon? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Yeah. I think that would be fascinating, because I mean, when you look back on human history in terms of domesticating plants, that's a big part of it. I think, I'm not so versed in sort of more archaeological or like historic anthropology, but I think, because I mean, also like who gets to decide that and which plant is it? There's also a film, I've got it right down here, by Nanoba Becker, I hope I pronounced that right, called The Sixth World. And it's a science fiction film about a Navajo person who goes into space, and basically I think they're going to Mars, and on their space shuttle, they have only a GMO corn, and basically it starts to rot. And so they're on the way to space and everything's dying. I won't spoil it.
No, it's
but
okay.
it's really because I mean, there's already been stuff written about that, like which crops do you take? Which
Yeah.
you know, I think it's totally fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't know if that
No.
answers your question very well.
No. That's
Yeah.
perfect. It just makes me think about I had the chance to go to the NASA's Veggie lab in Florida, and they're testing different ways of simulating growing plants, on Earth and in microgravity. And they're also starting to think of the long-term plan of, like, if we do send humans and we send them with a lot of different things, they are really concerned about the foods being nutrient dense and being diverse too at the same time. So as much as we would love to have like one crop, like you just bring a whole bunch of corn, like it's also like we've got to figure out these other plants that do really well in that kind of environment.
Exactly. And you don't know, how do you know which ones are gonna do well? Like, didn't they grow like pink lettuce on the ISS? I feel like
yeah they had a
So,
salad that they made floating there in gravity.
so like, how do you know which plants will work better? I mean, sorry, just a sidestep also, I mean, that's the thing with 3D printing, right? Like that it can work in outer space because there's no gravity. That's makes it so much easier to build up in layers because you don't have to have the scaffolding and all that.
Yeah, and like the lack of gravity, the layers between, to your point, are even bonding, it seems, at a better layer adhesion than it usually does in Earth, because it's counteracting gravity. And so like they want to, it seems, I'm taking my own opinion on this, but it seems like the materials want to come together way more in the 0G. And the parts that they printed on the ISS, the ones that you asked me where they're holding those parts, which I would love to know. And if anyone knows, let us know so we can find them. But like that's like a fascinating thing to bring it back to some of your research, like thinking of these first things made in space as those early tools that we find in historical context here on Earth, like making sure that those things are taken care of so that they can be seen and observed later down the line, and we understand where we start from.
Yeah. So I guess also to for some background for your listeners, my research specifically is focusing on the first 3D printed objects from space. I've kind of focused really specifically on the ratchet wrench, which I believe you're familiar with.
Yes.
And how these objects have kind of been replicated and seen throughout culture and society, I guess, and really like, what are they? Like, that's the thing that's already complicated with 3D objects in general, is like, where is the object? Is it the one that's you're printing yourself? Is it the file? And then how does that change when the first one in the public view was printed in space? Because that gives it sort of like a special aura, like we were referring to earlier.
Yeah, like an ethos, like this is where this thing came from. No, the 3D printed wrench is really interesting because like that file itself has gone, I mean, any 3D printing company, or like almost most people with 3D printers probably tried to print that thing at some point. So you mentioned about like, what is the 3D file? It's something that I deal with a lot as someone who actually works in 3D printing. And you had kind of opened up when we were talking about it for the research. I kind of thought about just how strange the concept of like a 3D file is, and I was explaining to someone the other day, just, I could go off on tangents about it, but it's a real thing. And I think, to your point, like it does come down to the actual thing. At the end of the day, if with 3D printing technology, it's about what it makes. And so it is the things that can be made. And those early tools, I don't know, but we'll dig them down, and we're gonna try and get you close to them so you can actually do some research on it.
Well, I think that the ones that were printed in space, from what I've gathered, they've probably been like destroyed through stress testing, I would imagine.
Probably a good.
Yeah. I was like, someone's keeping it, but I think probably it's just like, it's science. So
I know. Yeah, science can't advance without heaps, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But that's life, I guess.
Yeah. So let's talk about anthropology. So your research here is you're finishing that up now. What's that process been like for you, if you don't mind, like explaining
Oh
like
yeah.
how you approached it, like what were you thinking to do, and then how do you think about getting that stuff done?
Yeah. So basically what you have to do within the research process is beforehand, you kind of have to have an idea of what you want to look at. You have to go through pretty extensive ethical clearance. So you have to explain who you're going to talk to, why you're talking to them, why is it important, what are the possible risk factors for your community. Like within your masters, you are not really supposed to work with children, but like if you're going to work with children, you have to have lots of clearance on that.
Makes
People
sense.
who are like vulnerable in general, red flags. Anyways, so go through that, and then basically what I started was I just did a little bit of research trying to figure out where I wanted to focus, and then my methods were mainly interviews. I think the sort of most traditional part of anthropology is participant observation, which means you go and you live with the community, live with whoever you're researching, and really immerse yourself and be part of that community, so you can fully write with some sort of I don't know, gravity, if that's the right word, but or like validity. So you can feel like you're giving a true portrayal. But I feel, I mean, my field per se is, that's the problem within digital anthropology in general, is it's kind of hard to have a geospatially located field oftentimes. I mean, people have done really cool work, like Tom Bolstorf has done a whole book on, or two books I think, on which one is it, Second Life, the online platform where you have like an avatar. Yeah, so that's like in a way more bound, because at least it's like a place you enter. But with mine, because it was looking at an object, it's everyone's dispersed all throughout the internet. No, like not necessarily. I mean, I haven't found a NASA socket wrench fan club yet. If there is one, that would probably be the place. I think it's just me. But
I'll join.
so
I'll join.
yeah, perfect, amazing. We'll start it now. So if anyone wants to join, subscribe. But basically, so I just went through reaching out to people, letting them know what I'm doing, seeing if they want to talk to me, and then just kind of loosely interviewing them, not like having a sort of set of questions, but nothing too intense. So that was involving, I mean, people like yourself, people who are 3D printers, people who have Etsy shops, people who I found on Twitter who are just hashtagging about like, hey, remember this tweet you wrote in 2015? You want to talk to me about? Which went surprisingly well. I would not have thought.
Given the times, that's really good.
I talked to also some like a museum curator where the object has been in a museum, and that's about it. So basically just chatting, and then what you do is you kind of go away, put your head in the books, read everything you can that's relevant, and then you just start writing and kind of peppering the narratives you learn from people throughout the writing.
That's really cool, and I want to talk more, if you're cool to do that, about like your writing process, because I've been using kind of like how I write ideas, which is really just a whole bunch of like pieces of paper all over the place like a madman. But I do really enjoy a notebook and making the time for it. Is there anything that was there anything that you took that you learned from somebody else, or that's been really valuable to you for that process? Because writing is classically a really difficult thing for people. So I'm interested to hear what you think about it.
Where do I begin? I think I don't know that I necessarily have something. I think it's something you need to figure out for yourself, but I mean, it can depend. I've never really found the writing part painful. I know a lot of people hate it and like can't get the words out. They just fall out of my mouth or like fingers, I guess.
It's amazing.
But
has that always been the case for you?
Yeah, like I can
that's cool.
write for day. I mean, I can't spell, but I can write.
That's okay.
But yeah, I'm one of those people who I will just write. So if I have like a 3,000 word essay to hand in, I'll write 9,000 words and then just agonize over editing it down.
The editing process,
which editing is my least favorite, but that's because I do that to myself. But I find for me that my thinking process is writing. I know a lot of people, their thinking is different. They need to like, do webs or structures. I think what I've been trying to do mostly is basically write a structure, try and follow it, but usually by the end it's completely different from when I started. But yeah, I think what's been nice about doing something like digital anthropology is working primarily on Zoom, especially, is the godsend that is transcripts. So usually transcribing an interview would take, I think it's like it's 3 hours to 1 hour or more.
Oh yeah.
So luckily now it's all written out. I just have to make sure it's like lines up. But that means I can quickly take quotes from people, plop them in. But yeah, I think it's usually a lot of making loads of different drafts is my writing process, which I don't recommend, but that's how it works.
It works. But like you said, it works for you. Like, for me, like I sometimes it depends. And I have a few different tricks that I use for that kind of thing. But like I do use like mind maps. If there's really complex things, especially for the podcast, I do mind mapping for episodes.
Do you do it like a spot, like a web, like start in the middle?
Yeah, I'll start with a circle and then that'll grow out and tree off. Yeah. I learned that when I was doing a lot of soft skill training at an injection molding shop. So like personality training and how to work with people, things like that. So and get the most creativity and then also things like lean manufacturing. I don't know if you've heard about that approach.
No.
So like GE is one of the famous companies that pioneers lean. So it's 5S. I don't know if you've heard that before, but it's a standard of like quality and consistency. So GE wants to have 99.99% of light bulbs work perfectly and be the right quality. So it's how do you get it down to that 0.01% of failure? So a lot of it's big picture stuff, like the Japanese pioneered the technique. Kind of, it's a metaphorical idea of like, if whatever your path is or whatever you're trying to do is like a river, like a business is a flowing river, and there are things in the river that can get in the way and change the flow. And so there's things that you're doing. A lot of it is personality conflicts. A lot of it is the human beings and like interacting and making sure that if someone's feeling insecure about something while someone else is working, like making sure that everyone understands each other, how they think, so that the misunderstandings reduce and then we can all work together as a team.
Wow, I've never heard of, so like like you're saying personality training?
That's a lot of Jungian psychological stuff. Yeah, it's definitely, some of it's scientific, some of it's more woo-woo, but it's really powerful stuff.
Interesting, because in anthropology they just tell you to like build rapport, and then they're like, good luck.
Well, that's that's at the basis of like what learning like personality conflict and stuff like that is just learning how to hang out with someone and be
exactly. I mean, yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, so there's, I don't know why we went on that tangent, but
just talking about our really good social skills and how we learned them.
For real.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something. So for digital anthropology, have you started looking into the metaverse and NFTs, and is that world, because as far as the metaverse is concerned, when you're talking about like it's difficult to, in the digital sense, be on location with people, is that something that at all interests you to investigate? It's super early, but
yeah, for me, not so much. There's definitely some of my peers who are looking into that, like especially VR in general. I don't know. I know Metaverse is like more than just VR, but yeah, a lot of people are looking into that. Like, I guess co-presence. I've not looked into it myself. NFTs I've like dabbled in.
Yeah.
But I mean, because that's why I was really also interested in this Ratchet, and what has kind of been a theme a little bit is people talking about what if you could addition the file, because then that would make it more real.
Let's talk about that, because so like that's something that really interests me with the cross section, that, and I think we both have a similar interest in this. So like right now, we talked about the 3D file before. Like right now it's kind of like a JPEG. Like it's not, it's just something that you could transfer. It's not necessarily a one of anything. But yeah, from, if you could attach those type of things, and this is where I go on a rant at work a lot, is the industry is like not ready for, the technology is just not there for a file to contain the stuff that we're talking about, where you like, this could be like, this is the file that the astronauts use to, repair Apollo 13, right? Like something like that, like having that kind of weight to that something. We just need some people to work on how to do that.
Yeah, I think the thing that would only make me I'm not upset is the wrong word, but like is if they had made this file an NFT that only had one person able to buy it. Is that it kind of excludes everyone else. I mean, already 3D printers in 2014 when this happened are an exclusive thing, right? Not everyone has one at the time, and still now, but
they're becoming more common. Right? Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but I think it would kind of, I mean, I don't think I would be studying this if it wasn't made public, because I don't think it would have any weight, really. It'd be like, okay, someone bought it at the end, like any other space collectible. I think the fact that it was made public made it so much more exciting, and that you could own the same tool. So I guess, if there's a way of editioning it and still giving it freely, maybe would be interesting. But
or maybe it comes down to maybe the files are open source, and it's having the multiples of the things that were made. Like if, I don't know, if someone puts a 3D printer up there and NASA's like, hey, we've got to make sure we hit our budget for next year. Let's print 4 of these things and make it so that those things are what's the word I'm looking for? Exclusive. And then the rest, so there's a lot of possibility for that to help with space. But the good thing about space is that it's such an open source heavy field at the moment. NASA being a big proponent of that type of thing. I feel like it fits well with like what we're talking about, where like a lot of these digital what's the word I'm looking for? Items,
digital objects,
objects, but like historical objects, like these things can still be available to everyone, but they have utility at the same time.
And I think that's also been a little bit of what's come up throughout my research is it the real file? Like I was talking to a collector, and he was saying he would only want the file if it had basically come off a thumb drive that the astronaut Barry Whilmore had taken from the ISS and given to him. So he would need it to be the file that actually went up, not just the same file that also went up, but it's still this act of going to space and coming down, which is so important. So I mean, that's interesting, like looking at the history of the file you get. Like, how do you know which one you've got? Like, I mean, people can also download them on GitHub or on Thingiverse, whatever. But it seems like a lot of people who are really interested in space want theirs to come from the NASA website, because at least that's the closest that they can get.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I guess blockchain could help in that it could leave a record of like who owned it. But even like if you had like, I don't know, NASA has like their own USB drives or something like that.
Do they?
Like, that could be kind of cool.
Yeah.
I
think also, I mean, there's that like thing you have to mention when you're talking about like blockchain or NFTs is also the environmental impact of those technologies, is that they're highly pollutant, as far as I've understood, because they take so much energy to keep them on the blockchain. I'm not an expert, but I've heard that
of Bitcoin specifically. I think Elon Musk made a big stink about that as well. Because everywhere over the world, but I know China specifically was before they banned it, they were buying up huge lots of these computer farms, basically just dumping heat from the computers running and mining all day long. You're just giant hot zones that you're creating, dumping air and heat into the atmosphere. Definitely not great.
Well, there's been I think I'm not gonna say anthropologists, because they might be in a different field, but they did work on basically a what do you call them, computer farm in Sweden. That's, I want to say like a subsidiary of Facebook, but don't quote me on that. But basically they were looking to heat a city, a town, with the heat that comes off of the processing. But that's where it gets interesting from like the anthropological viewpoint, is that's great, you're using the energy, but then that determines when you have the heat on is like when you're processing in the computer. So like, do you have the heat on all summer as well? Like, what happens with those things. It's yeah, you fall in a whole rabbit hole with that.
Oh dude, no, that's
Yeah.
crazy. Man, we do some crazy stuff, and like human behavior is something that I've been learning way more about. And so many of the things that we do that we don't even realize we're doing it is kind of crazy. And I'm sure that falls into, like, I feel like that's what you guys are observing as anthropologists a lot, is the stuff that we don't even realize that we're doing. Like in the moment, we could feel like our life is going this way, or that we're like being really consistent about, I guess I'll use an example that I know I'm not consistent in, working out and like being physical. Like I think I might be, but I'm not. Like I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of things that we think we're like, oh no, human beings, we're awesome there. And it's like, have you looked at the track record?
Yeah, exactly. I know, it's so true. It's, I mean, I don't think that probably anthropologists can even recognize those things about themselves, but yeah, you can be like, I'll judge you though.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Is what is there anything specific about like anthropologists? Is there like uh a, a type of anthropologist, or like could you like pick an anthropologist out of a room?
That's tricky. I would say there's two kinds, because there's either really chatty ones or there are quite quiet ones. So it's like if you're really observant, like I've met some quite quiet people who are really good at talking to other people though. Because a lot of anthropology is about listening, right? And observing. So you don't sometimes being chatty can actually get in the way, because you'll be talking over people, you're not actually listening properly. So yeah, I wouldn't I mean, to me, I'm like, I imagine like archaeologists, which is depends on where you are in the world. Sometimes archaeology is considered part of anthropology, and sometimes it's like a
I was reading that. I didn't realize that was a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So like the whole Indiana, so I'm like, if I tell people I'm in anthropology, like, oh, Indiana Jones. I'm like, well, like not really. But, yeah. Or like Facebook stalking people is kind of more what I do.
Right.
But yeah. So, anyways, where was I going with that? Type of. Sorry, I feel like in my mind, archaeologists are a type of person, but I'm sure they're not. I'm sure, but within them, because I'm like, I don't know. They seem like, whoa, like of the earth, really interested in pottery shards. I'm not going to air my beef with our archaeologists here.
No worries. No, that's interesting, because it makes me understand more that like it really is for anthropologists, the human connection. Like the humans are the science. So, having that skill to actually talk to them and be, because you can't be, well, okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like if you don't have social skills, it's going to be difficult for you to do good science.
That's tricky.
Okay.
I would say yes, but there are definitely some people who don't have good social skills who've done great work. Like one of
observers.
I can't speak to his social skills, but one of the sort of like founding fathers of anthropology, Malinowski, he apparently went to the field because I think because of something to do with one of the wars. Sorry, this is so vague. He got like, I guess, stranded on an island. He wasn't supposed to stay there as long, and he like absolutely hated it, did not get along with the local people there, but like has written one of the main texts that we work on, that we use. So I don't know, I mean, I can't say about his social skills because I don't know him personally, but I think to a certain point you just need to be able to actually observe and pick things out. So I think it's more about being curious is the main qualifier for being an anthropologist. I think I don't know if anyone's listening who wants to do anthropology but doesn't feel they have good social skills. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think you just need to be able to be curious.
No, thank you. I'm glad to learn about it, because it's such an interesting field, but it's always seemed like such like an Indiana Jones thing. Like how do you do that? How can you do this as a job? That sounds pretty cool.
I mean, having like the gift of the gab is always great, because I mean, it'll help you in really any field, I think, but you can work around that.
Yeah. So let's recap your research, if you don't mind. So you've gone through this whole process. You've taken a look at, you've spoken to a whole bunch of different people in this space, myself included. Is there anything that you have taken away from it?
I think, which we've not talked about, but I think one of the main things that I've taken away is how important the story was. So coming to this late, sorry, but essentially as the story goes, the astronaut Barry Whilmore, or Butch he's called, after the first phase of printing, when they basically did a bunch of coupons that were just to test how the printer works. You might know better than me, Alex, on that part. But after that, he needed a wrench, didn't have the right one for the right job. Kind of, it gets muddy around why he needed it, but that's fine. And then the people at Made in Space who were doing the 3D printing, they drew one up, I don't know, designed one, engineered one, whatever word you want to use, in like a couple of days, sent it up by email. And that was different from the other ones because they were all on the hardware that had gone up with the printer, whereas this was the first emailed tool. So I think that added to the sort of like sexiness of the headlines, like we've emailed a tool to space. And I think this kind of like astronaut in need really took the public imagination and really allowed people to run with it and, like, you know, compare it to the Star Trek replicator and other sci-fi options. I think it really kind of made this, it combined a real problem with a sort of science fiction scenario, even though it's it is all real, it's not science fiction. But I think that's really something that was really important within this ratchet, is that it kind of holds that in it. And I think the secondary part of that is it also holds the narrative of moving off Earth, right? Like, if we can 3D print tools, if we can 3D print anything, it means we can get further and further from Earth because we don't have to bring things with us. So it also acts as like as a starting point of moving away from Earth, moving to Mars, that kind of stuff. That's where I've been I've been writing this chapter at the moment, so I'm obsessed with it right now. But
no, this is great because I don't get to talk to anybody about this. So so like in 3D printing, I've worked as an application engineer, just to give people some context. So like an application engineer, yes, works with like software and stuff like that, but is highly focused on the part that's being made and how it's going to perform. So like it's kind of all about the part at the end of the day. And even when someone buys a 3D printer, the biggest mistake most people make when they buy a 3D printer is I want a 3D printer. And if you don't have a reason for it, you know, hobbyist 3D printer, if it's cheap, that's a different thing. But for a company and a business or an organization like NASA to put a 3D printer in space, there has to be that reason to do that. And that's what a lot of the industry is focused on Earth with 3D printing, is how do we tell this story to these people so that they buy this and it becomes real? They obviously can save money and get a return on their investment, but at the same time, it's about innovating and changing things up. So, you know, with the pandemic, we saw that huge switch to 3D printing to help alleviate the supply chain issues that we had. You know, the early days, I was helping 3D print masks for people or you know, ear restraints so that, you know, the strings weren't pulling on you all the time. And it was amazing how quickly people could get together on that, and it like got a whole bunch of people in their basements really jazzed up about like doing something to help. And it changed the whole way people look at it. I think President Biden the other day had this speech. I don't know any of the specifics yet, but focusing on investing in additive technology for supply chain issues in the future. And I think that's a great thing to start focusing on that. And it helps people around the world. You can send a file around the world in a second, and anyone with a printer on site can build it. It's a really magical thing that we're only just figuring out here, and it's gonna change the way we do stuff in space.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Alex. I feel like that could be an entire dissertation in itself. Is looking at, I'm like, excuse me, I need to change my reading. But I feel like it's so true, because having done a lot of literature in what like the history of 3D printing, especially in like the public opinion, and how it was going to be like this third industrial revolution and it was going to change everything, and then it kind of slow down, like we stopped talking about it for a minute.
Yeah.
But I think that that the pandemic definitely provided an opportunity to showcase how this like sort of decentralized method of production that's like in the hands of people in their households, like that anyone can really control it, and it can be very what's the word, when you can like modify it to whoever or whatever, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, if
Yeah.
it
Fully
doesn't take any more
customizable.
time to make
Yeah.
something in blue versus yellow. I mean, changing
Right.
the filament, I know, but
Yeah. But that's still, yeah.
but compared to like doing something in like you can, or sizing different, right? Like
Right.
obviously you can change the color for any kind of manufacturing, but whatever. I feel like it's made it, people understand and appreciate actually what 3D printing does, even though that has been recognized by scholars for ages, and
Right.
like, you know, Wired magazine, whatever. But I feel like it's taken a long time for the public and like, you know, government to catch on.
Yeah. No, true. And it's funny because the people that can make a 3D printer aren't necessarily the people, like those people are not going to have all the ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and a lot of what we do on our Instagram page, because I just wanted to prove out this thesis for myself, was if I show people what I'm printing and what is possible, even if it's something stupid simple, but if you just show people that it can be made, it gets other people thinking about other things. And I can't tell you how many people have reached out just on DMs and just be like, hey, I saw you print this. What do you think about this? And it's something I never would have even thought about.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone has that capability. It's just, it, I think that one day we will get 3D printers to the point where everyone's going to have them in their home. And just like you have a desktop computer or a cell phone, like, and at that point you have all of the material at that point. You cut out the middleman of the manufacturing, and to put the
Mm-hmm.
means of production in the hands of the individual is something that's never happened really
Yeah.
in history, and it has that potential to change things. um but
And I think also what maybe the average person who doesn't interact with 3D printing much might not think about, and this is, I can't take credit for this has come from one of the participants in my research, but
mm,
that you can also, you can think of how to engineer things so much differently, because first of all, if you're making things all in one piece, and that's different, right? You don't
right.
need like nuts and bolts, but
Mm,
also you can embed things while
yes.
you're printing. Like there's, you can almost design, I think the person who was talking to me said you can design from the inside out, so you don't have to design
That's
just
beautiful.
reproducing something but in 3D printed plastic or metal. You can do, you can think completely differently because there's a whole different rules and mechanics at work.
It's, oh man, like I, anyone that's interested in getting into 3D printing, like even if you think it's somewhat fascinating, like there's so much beauty in, from being, from a design standpoint. I think one of the things and why I talk about SpaceX so much in this podcast, because of just the way that they do engineering. They don't
Mm-hmm.
look at it as, you know, I've had definitely some weird back and forth and angst from old space and like NASA in the old days and stuff like that. Um, Partly from my struggle of getting into the industry, but the the approach of looking at it, what is like, what is the best thing? Like Starship is a great example, right? Like SpaceX's next big rocket, it's the colony, like it's the thing where people live, you can fly there and you can fly back. That's not possible right now.
Mm.
And that type of big picture goal, big risk, that's what the Saturn V was, that's what the moon missions were. It's taking that approach, and 3D printing opens up the engineer to really make things. And anyone, like makers are the maker community is something that I'm so happy that I found, because it's just a, you don't have to be like a degreed engineer. I think there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
stigma that comes with someone having a degree, and believe me, I understand that. But there's so many people that can make things, can, like we have a resin 3D printer now that we're able to make basically the positive part of a casting. So we could make jewelry potentially by
Mm.
printing this plastic, burning it and getting it out, and then filling it with metal. Like I can do that in my backyard. Like that's a wild thing and a
Mm-hmm.
capability to allow an individual to do. So there's so much potential. and I could talk about it forever.
I know, but I think it's unfortunate that 3D printing kind of, I mean, from my perspective, I could be wrong,
Please.
but kind of has this like, it almost seems like gimmicky for people who don't really understand it. So like, oh, create like a 3D printed twist tie, amazing. Like,
Yeah.
I think there's a part of it that is so cool, and like, I don't know if misunderstood, because maybe that's just the corner of the internet I exist in, but
No, it's
yeah.
pervasive in the industry too. I mean, like even plastic printers to a certain, a lot of the things that people print are gimmicks, because they're trying to sell stuff, right? Like you can
Yeah.
give away a gimmick really easily. And I think that's part of it. Part of it is also, like you mentioned before, it moved so quickly. The industry and the expectations, the space industry did the same thing, where we thought we would be on the moon and Mars and traveling through space and have flying cars, and that didn't happen. And we're in that period right now with 3D printing, where we're only just starting to understand what really can be made and changed. And that the work a lot of people have been doing to catch up the technology is finally starting to hit the ground. So
Yeah, I think it's so interesting though that 3D printing and space exploration, or aerospace sciences, have kind of had this similar trajectory that's been set in place because of science fiction. Like, we expected we were going to be in space because of all different kinds of science fiction, including like the Jetsons, if you call that science fiction. I don't know. But even like with 3D printing has been in many different forms, like in terms of additive manufacturing or rapid prototyping within science fiction, that you just assume like, okay, why can't I have my food on demand?
Right.
Whereas right now we're like 3D printing like goo. That's kind of as far as we can get for food. But yeah, I think the expectations were just made so high because of these like visions of the future.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's just like a technology thing, because I don't know if that's the case with everything else, because maybe everything else had like a utility immediately, where this is kind of open-ended. It's almost magic in a certain sense. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I guess if there was like really janky teleporters, we'd be like, okay, I guess.
I think I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want my arm like coming out of my head or something.
Yeah. Ideally not. Yeah.
No. But Jane, thank you for like coming and chatting about this. I'm really excited to see where your research goes, and how that final paper gets done,
Yeah.
and what's next for you, like after this paper. I'm sure you're not thinking of anything else, but
so my latest goal was to enter the space sector, but I don't know if you've heard, Alex, but it's a very competitive, difficult industry to get into.
Jane, I don't believe this.
I know. It shook me to my core.
Me too.
Because I would love to work in like HR in space, because it's just like gossip on a interplanetary level, and that's just gets my goat. But we'll see. I mean, there's more and more social sciences are entering into the space industry, because we're realizing you actually have to consider human factors, not just, I mean, human factors aside from like health, like also how people interact.
Absolutely.
So more and more, like some of like my professors have been like consulted within projects, grant stuff. I think it's happening more and more. So I mean, that would be the goal. But otherwise, coasting, maybe tech adjacent. I'm not sure, but social research basically would be the goal.
Cool. No, I think that's great. Going on the human aspect of space, I think so from an HR perspective, the space industry is dying for people like yourself, who actually want to do the people stuff, because the engineers more often than not are not great with people. So it takes someone thinking completely differently to really balance that out. So I would say, like, there's a lot of startups, space startups, that could definitely use that kind of help. There's also, with America's ability to send astronauts into space, and the European Space Agency getting involved as well, with SpaceX, there's a lot of human psychology and behavioral science that is going to be done from just to observe. Like, we're going to be spending more and more time in different places in space with human beings than we've ever done before. So there's a lot of ground to be done there. And I wouldn't be surprised if that industry blows up a lot. because once we start getting private astronauts, I mean, Blue Origin's already halfway there. So if more of these companies start sending humans into space, there's going to be a huge need for that type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, fingers crossed. If anyone wants to hire me, reach out to Alex.
Absolutely.
I'll move if you need me.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you for coming on. It's been a
no problem.
Great talking with you. Any final thoughts for the folks out there on anything?
I would say the only thing I would mention is just maybe we need to consider a little bit the language we use around space. Like we were talking earlier about like colonizing,
right,
settling, like exploitation. I think we just need to think a little bit about what that says about what we're doing in space. That's the only thing I would say.
I love that. Being specific and focused on the mission is huge, because we are a bunch of emotional apes, and we can get ourselves stuck in a weird scenario if we're not careful. And language is a big part of that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Jane, thank you again for coming on.
No problem. Thank you, Alex.
Everybody, spread love and spread science. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time on Today in Space.